It is the night of the 14th of November, 1940, and somewhere above the rolling hills of the West Country, a German bomber crew stares down through cloudbreak at a pattern of fires burning in neat, deliberate rows. To the navigator, checking his instruments against the radio beam humming in his headset, the fires below are unmistakably a target. The bomb aimer leans into his sight, doors open, 2 tons of high explosive tumble away into the darkness. Below, nothing of military value is struck. No factory burns, no railway junction collapses, no dock catches fire. The bombs fall on empty Somerset farmland, cratering a field of turnips, startling a herd of cattle and leaving a farmhouse untouched half a mile away. The German crew flying home across the Channel will log the mission as a success. Coventry or Bristol or whatever city they believed they had struck will show no damage in the reconnaissance photographs taken the next day. Their commanders will be baffled. Their instruments told them they were exactly where they needed to be. They were wrong, and they had been made wrong on purpose. What that bomber crew did not know, and what most of the German Air Ministry would not properly understand until the war was nearly over, was that Britain had found a way to reach into the sky and quietly rewrite the truth. Not with anti-aircraft guns, not with fighter aircraft scrambling into the dark, but with radio waves carefully shaped and precisely mistimed, broadcast from unremarkable huts scattered across the English countryside. The Germans were flying on beams they trusted completely. Those beams were lying to them. And the people doing the lying were a small, secretive unit of Royal Air Force engineers and scientists who rarely fired a shot in the entire war, yet may have saved more British lives than almost any single weapon deployed during the Blitz. This is the story of how Britain turned Germany's own navigation technology into an instrument of self-deception, and how a war fought partly in silence, over frequencies nobody could see, quietly bent the course of the Blitz. To understand why this trick was necessary, it helps to understand the problem Britain faced in the autumn of 1940. The Luftwaffe had begun its night bombing campaign against British cities, and it had a genuine technical advantage that fighter command's daylight victories in the Battle of Britain could not solve. German bomber crews were using radio navigation beams, most famously a system the British codenamed Knickebein, German for crooked leg, which used intersecting radio signals transmitted from stations in occupied Europe. A bomber would fly along one beam, listening for a steady tone in its headphones, and when it crossed a second beam at the correct point, that intersection marked the target. It required no visual reference at all. A crew could bomb accurately through 10/10ths cloud cover in pitch darkness over a blacked-out city that gave away no light whatsoever. This was a serious problem. British night defenses in late 1940 were, by any honest measure, almost useless. Radar-guided night fighters existed only in prototype form. Anti-aircraft guns lacked the fire control systems to hit aircraft they could not see. The only genuine hope of limiting damage lay not in shooting bombers down, but in making them miss. And the accuracy the Germans were achieving with their beam systems was remarkable for the period, with some estimates suggesting bombing errors of under a mile even in total darkness, a level of precision that made industrial targets, docks, and city centers alarmingly vulnerable. British intelligence had picked up hints of a German beam system as early as June 1940, largely through the analysis of a scientist named Reginald Victor Jones, working within the Air Ministry's Scientific Intelligence Branch. Jones pieced together fragments, decrypted signals, intercepts, and a captured document or two, and concluded that Germany possessed a directional radio system capable of guiding bombers with startling accuracy. When he first proposed this to senior figures, including Winston Churchill, he was met with skepticism. It seemed almost too clever, too elegant a solution for anyone to credit the Luftwaffe with having built it. Churchill, to his credit, backed Jones anyway and authorized the formation of a unit whose entire purpose would be to find, understand, and defeat these beams before the winter bombing campaign began in earnest. The answer came from a Royal Air Force formation known as 80 Wing, based initially at Radlett in Hertfordshire, and commanded by Wing Commander Edward Addison, a signals officer with a gift for translating abstract physics into working hardware. Addison's team worked alongside civilian scientists and the telecommunications research establishment, and they approached the German beam problem with two distinct techniques, one blunt and one extraordinarily subtle. The blunt technique was blunt. The blunt technique was jamming, codenamed aspirin, which flooded the German beam frequencies with noise, degrading the clean tone a bomber crew relied upon for guidance. It worked, but crudely, and German engineers quickly learned to adjust their transmissions to fight through the interference. The subtle technique was the one that mattered more, and it is the one this story is really about. Rather than simply drowning out the German signal, 80 Wing built stations that listened to the enemy beam and then retransmitted a copy of it, timed with such precision that a German receiver could no longer tell which signal was genuine. This process became known within the RAF as meakening, a term built from masking beacon, and the individual stations doing the work were called meakins. The technical elegance of a meakin station lay in its deceptive simplicity. Each station consisted of a receiving aerial tuned to the German beam frequency, a short delay circuit, and a transmitting aerial that would rebroadcast what it heard. Because radio waves travel at a fixed and enormous speed, the timing had to be almost unimaginably precise, delays measured in millionths of a second, adjusted constantly by operators who effectively had to out-navigate the Luftwaffe's own transmitters in real time. Imagine two people humming the exact same note from different rooms, and a listener in a third room trying to work out which singer is actually the one they are meant to be following. If the second singer is loud enough and close enough in pitch, the listener cannot reliably tell them apart, and if that second singer very gradually shifts their pitch, they can lead the listener's attention wherever they choose. That, in essence, is what a Meakin station did to a Knickebein beam. Stations were positioned in a chain along England's eastern and southern coasts, disguised as ordinary agricultural buildings or folded into existing Royal Air Force installations, deliberately unremarkable so that German reconnaissance would give them no special attention. The equipment itself was not large. A single Meakin transmitter and its associated receiving gear could fit within a modest wooden hut, drawing power comparable to a handful of household appliances rather than anything resembling the vast-dish aerials people might imagine from later Cold War intelligence work. Manufacturing was handled through existing Royal Air Force signals depots, and although exact production figures remain difficult to pin down, likely due to wartime classification and the deliberate destruction of sensitive records, after 1945, historians generally agree that dozens of these stations were operating across Britain by the height of the Blitz in the winter of 1940 into 1941. Alongside Meakening, 80 Wing developed decoy sites to complement the radio deception, most famously the Starfish sites, open fields rigged with controlled fires and dim, city-like lighting patterns designed to mimic the glow of a bombed and burning urban area when viewed from altitude. Used together, a bent radio beam that nudged a bomber crew slightly off the true course, and a convincing decoy fire glowing in exactly the wrong field, could combine to convince an experienced crew they had struck their target when they had done nothing of the sort. In practical use, the results were genuinely strange to read about even now. Post-war analysis of Luftwaffe bombing patterns during raids on cities including Birmingham and Bristol found clusters of bomb damage several miles from the intended target, sometimes falling squarely on open countryside where a Starfish decoy had been burning that same night. German aircrew debriefing reports recovered after the war described navigators confidently logging correct beam crossings, utterly unaware that the beam they had crossed was not the one their commanders back in France had transmitted. If you're finding this interesting so far, a quick subscribe genuinely helps more than you might think, and costs you nothing. It would be wrong to suggest the Luftwaffe never adapted. German engineers introduced improved beam systems throughout the war, including the more sophisticated X-Gerät and later WWII, each attempting to outpace British countermeasures, and 80 Wing responded in turn with new deception techniques codenamed Bromide and Domino. This back and forth, invisible to almost everyone on the ground, became one of the quieter arms races of the entire conflict, fought not with factories and steel but with oscillators, aerials, and the patient, unglamorous work of engineers listening through the night. The comparison with German countermeasures against British navigation aids is telling. Germany possessed nothing quite as developed as Britain's Meekening network for most of the war, partly because the strategic bombing threat to German cities did not reach the scale of the Blitz until 1942 and beyond, and partly because British navigation aids like G and